morning, members of the Transportation Review Committee. This meeting is now called to order at 10:01 a.m. We will now begin the meeting with a roll call of all members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, please indicate if you are present. I will begin going through member agency alphabetically. Ted Wolf, Apache Junction. Audra Merrick, ADOT. Thank you. Raj Thowdam, Avondale. Scott Zipridge, Buckeye. CJ DiMaggio, Carefree.
Present.
Thank you. Hal Marin, Cave Creek. Jason Crampton, Chandler.
Here.
Thank you. Jorge Gastelum, El Mirage.
Present.
Thank you. Romer Trulli, FHWA. Maricela Benitez as proxy for Christopher Salas, Florence.
Present.
Thank you. David Janover, Fountain Hills.
Here.
Thank you. Jason Hafner, Gilbert.
Present.
Thank you. Parab Adabala as proxy for Shahid Abbas, Glendale.
Here.
Thank you. Steve Cinto, Goodyear.
Present.
Thank you. Amanda Nelson, Guadalupe. Keith Jernaski, Litchfield Park.
Here.
Thank you. Scott Nodes, Maricopa. Chair Wilcox.
Present.
Thank you. Eric Guderian as proxy for RJ Zeter, Mesa.
Here.
Thank you. Shar Johnson, Paradise Valley. Brandy Kelso, Phoenix. Christopher Wanamaker, Pinal County Public Works. Mohammed Yusuf, Queen Creek.
Here.
Thank you. Sam Taylor as proxy for Mark Melanchenko, Scottsdale.
Present.
Thank you. Eric Bowles, Surprise. Shelley Seiler, Tempe.
Here.
Thank you. Chris Hamilton, Tolleson. Trevor Collin, Valley Metro. Thank you. Herschel Workman, Wickenburg. And Grant Anderson, Youngtown.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you. Our next item is call to the audience. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda, informational items, or items on the agenda for discussion and not for action. 15 minutes will be provided for the call to the audience unless the chair requests an exception to this limit. I have received no requests to speak for the call to the audience. MAG also provides the opportunity for members of the public to submit written comments via the MAG website. Any comments received 2 hours prior to the meeting have been shared with the committee members in advance of the meeting for consideration and will be included in the formal meeting minutes. Staff, have we received any online written comments for the call to the audience?
Thank you, Chair. We have not received any online written comments for call to the audience.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 3, MAG staff report. Pat Stone, the MAG Deputy Transportation Director for Programming, will provide the report.
Thank you, Chair Wilcox, members of the Transportation Review Committee. Pleasure to be here today to present my report. I'd like to start first with acknowledging our newest member of the Transportation Review Committee, Steve Cinto, representing the city of Goodyear, joined the committee. So welcome, Steve. Pleasure to have you on board. Next, financial updates for HERF and RARF, starting first with the Regional Area Road Fund, or RARF. Revenues for January up 4.2% over the prior year at this time, and 1% over ADOT's forecast. Good numbers. Overall for the year, amounts are trending slightly higher, about 0.3% higher for the year. For the Highway User Revenue Fund, or HERF, numbers for January up 10% over the prior January 2024, and almost 5% above forecast. And then one final note, Chair, members of the TRC, flagging an item that will be coming up for future action. We will have the federal fund advancement for the Arterial Lifecycle Program under consideration at next month's meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Patrick. If members have any questions, please contact Patrick after the meeting. Moving on to item number 4, informational items. Item 4 is for information only. Does any member of the committee have any questions or request a presentation on any of these items? Hearing none, next is agenda item 5, approval of the consent agenda. Items 5A and 5B are on the consent agenda. Does any member of the committee have any questions or request a presentation on any of these items? Hearing none, prior to approval of the consent agenda, there is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on any item on the consent agenda. I have received no request for the consent agenda. Staff, have we received any online written comments for the consent agenda?
Thank you, Chair. We have not received any online written comments for the consent agenda.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve consent agenda items 5A and 5B?
Mr. Chair, this is Jason Hafner with the Town of Gilbert. So moved.
Thank you, Jason. And second?
Al Marin, Town of Cave Creek, second.
Thank you. We will have those participating in the meeting online take part in the voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. We need to see the faces of everyone to participate in the voice vote. For those who cannot or do not want to turn on their cameras, staff will conduct a roll call vote. Staff will only call on those virtual participants who did not turn on their camera. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote so staff can count the people's names and whose cameras are not on. Can I have a voice vote of those in the room and those online? Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. Members, please leave your cameras on. Staff, can you take a roll call vote of the members participating virtually who did not turn on their cameras?
Thank you, Chair. Everyone had their cameras on. The motion passes.
Very good. Well done, committee members. So we'll move on to item 6, Proposition 479, Arterial Life Cycle Program, Policies and Procedures. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented by Carrie Kassler, MEG Transportation Planner. Carrie?
Thank you, Chair. Hello, members of TRC. Today I'll be presenting on Proposition 479, Arterial Life Cycle Program, Policies and Procedures. So first, to go over a little bit of background about the program, as many of you are very familiar, the Prop 479 Arterial Life Cycle Program, or ALCP, is the financial management tool of the arterial streets component of the Regional Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Investment Plan, or the RSTIP. It contains a list of 91 defined projects within the RSTIP supported by Prop 479 and is guided by the policies and procedures, which outlines the management and oversight of the program. Again, a visual you all are very familiar with. Here's an overview of the arterial projects included in the RSTIP from phase 1 through phase 4 of the 20-year span of the program. So to provide some background on the program itself, the ALCP is currently a program outlined in the Regional Transportation Plan under Proposition 400. Overall, this program's been a resounding success for the past 20 years. The policies were developed in 2004 and have been updated several times over the 20-year span. And all of those updates are generated from input by the ALCP working group and brought through the MAG committee process for approval. So this document was used as the basis for the development of Prop 479 ALCP policies and procedures. Again, since it was such a big success, we used that document as the base and adapted it to align with the new program. Many of the elements remain the same. The funding split is consistent with a 70-30 split from regional funding to local funding. The project savings are also handled the same way, where savings can only be reallocated once the original project has been completed and all associated requirements have been met. And the current process for regional funding closeout begins in April TRC and continues through the MAG process in May, 1 month before the annual update. This process will remain the same in the Prop 479 ALCP. So the main point we really are driving home with the difference between the two programs is the funding sources. The Prop 400 ALCP is funded by federal funds as well as the dedicated half-cent sales tax or regional funds. The program under Prop 479 is entirely regionally funded. Ultimately, this makes it easier for the member agencies to implement their projects as regional funds are more flexible than federal funds. So as many of you were involved, a working group was comprised of member agency staff as well as MAG staff and has been meeting for the past just about a year, beginning in June of 2024, where they met to discuss and develop the initial draft of the policies, again, using the Prop 400 ALCP policies to create the new one. The presentation was made to this committee in December of 2024, outlining the progress made by that working group, as well as any remaining items that we sought guidance on from you as well as the policy committees. We highlighted some notable changes within the policy document, such as removal of any language relating to federally funded projects. Again, it is no longer applicable. Next was the revision and improvement of the project change tool, which is the mechanism used by agencies to swap out projects into the program. And lastly, adding language outlining the process to account for inflation in project budgets, among other things as well. These are just some of the highlights and things we brought to the policy committees for guidance. So here's an overview of our upcoming timeline. First, we will be seeking approval or recommended approval from TRC and then the policy committees through March. If all goes well, the intent is to begin discussion of project sequencing, which I know many member agencies are eager to begin. Additionally, the revenue and cost updates will be brought through to understand the impact of inflation on the program. And ultimately, the goal is to take the first draft of the Prop 479 ALCP for approval in June of 2025. Mr. Chair, members of TRC, today we are seeking approval, a recommended approval for the Proposition 479 Arterial Life Cycle Program Policies and Procedures. Before I open myself up to questions, I'd like to thank the member agency staff. This was really a culmination of y'all's hard work, and I just get the honor of presenting it to you all today. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Carrie. Do any members have any questions or comments of Carrie?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Jason, City of Chandler.
Yes, Jason.
Carrie, hey, thanks for the presentation. I wanted to thank MAG staff for the excellent work on these committees. You guys were very professional, providing a lot of great information and making sure that all the committee members were heard throughout. So very much appreciate that. I did have a question about how the ALCP will work in conjunction with the next item on the agenda, the Arterial Competitive Program. Just wondering if the ALCP is set up in a way that would allow for somebody to apply under the Arterial Competitive Program for funding, either to get funding sooner than the ALCP is programmed, or maybe to get additional funding if a project does not have enough funding on it. Just wondering if the ALCP is set up to allow for that federal funding to come in and maybe contribute toward the 70% cap of regional funding that's allowed on the project.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Crampton, thank you for that question. I believe that Patrick might touch on that in his next presentation, but my answer here would be ultimately that is a policy question and will be brought through the ALCP working group if that is something that the body thinks is appropriate. That will be generated entirely through the ALCP working group and then brought through the MAG committee process for approval if necessary.
Chair Wilcox, members of the TRC, Mr. Crampton, just to expand a little bit further on Ms. Kassler's response, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. We developed the policies, Jason, very much realizing we did not have federal funds included in there. If we have a situation come up, not just with the arterial competitive programs, but also if an agency seeks, they get a state appropriation or they get a federal discretionary grant. If we do have that situation come up, we'll come back, as Carrie said, bring the working group back together and then figure out if we bring in a policy change or if we do that specifically at a project level. And it may be we handle these exceptions at the project level this time and not rewrite the entire policy to account for perhaps a 1 or 2 off kind of situation.
Okay, so as the policy is written now and what we're voting on, there it sounds like there is some flexibility to allow it at a project level without revising the whole policies.
Chair Wilcox, members of the TRC, Mr. Crampton, I will use the theory that it is not specifically excluded from the policies. But if we did have the situation, we would have to account for it at a project level. There's nothing that says you couldn't go out and seek additional funding outside of the arterial program to fund your project.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions of the members for Ms. Kassler? Prior to voting, there is an opportunity for members of the public to comment. I have received no requests for this agenda item. Staff, have we received any online written comments for this agenda item?
Mr. Chair, we have not received any online written comments for this agenda item.
Thank you, Carrie. Is there a motion to recommend approval of the arterial rehabilitation and reconstruction program policies and procedures? Can I have a motion, please?
Mr. Chair, this is Jason Hafner with the town of Gilbert. So moved.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. And thank you, Trevor, for the second. We will have those participating in the meeting online take part in the voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote. Can I have a voice vote of those in the room and those online? Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. Members, please leave your cameras on. Staff, can you take a roll call vote of the members participating virtually who did not turn on their camera?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, everyone had their cameras on. Great work, and the motion passes.
Thank you, members. We'll move to item number 7, arterial rehabilitation and reconstruction program policies and procedures. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented by Patrick Stone, MAG Deputy Transportation Director for Programming.
Good morning, Chair Wilcox, members of the Transportation Review Committee. Pleasure to be here to present this item on the arterial rehabilitation and reconstruction program, specifically the policies and procedures that will guide this program. So start kind of a high-level overview of the ARRP. It's too long to say the entire name. This is one of the first 2 competitive programs being developed under the Regional Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Investment Plan, or RSTIP. The other will be my next agenda item, which we will be bringing forth. One thing to note, these 2 programs that we'll be talking about today are actually funded with federal dollars allocated to the MAG region and are fully funded by federal funding outside of the local agency match. Similar to Ms. Kassler's item previously, really the development efforts for this one, especially member agency driven. We developed kind of a skeleton of some thoughts, brought them forth to a working group made up of member agencies, conducted 7 meetings over the second half of 2024 to arrive at the policies that you see before you today. So some general items, the funding for the for the program, $25 million a year, $500 million for the life cycle of the RSTIP. Those again expressed in 2020 dollars. Call for projects, what member agencies are most curious about. The intent, and you will see it in my timeline later in my presentation, is to go out later this spring, assuming approval of the policies. Call for projects in 25. Looking to fund fiscal years 26, 27, and 28. Obviously, understanding fiscal year 26 is a bit of a stretch, but we'll have some flexibility and work with member agencies that are awarded projects. And then finally, the technical review of this program will, as part of the policies, will actually be initiated at the MAG Street Committee. They will be responsible for reviewing the applications, ranking the projects. I do note this committee has the specific responsibility of developing the funding scenario for these projects once we do that call, hopefully later this year. So goals, obviously good to have a program. You have to have a target. What are you trying to accomplish? There are actually 4 goals associated with the arterial widening program. First, improve overall roadway safety with well-maintained road surfaces. And you will hear the term safety time and time again in both of my presentations this morning. It's an emphasis area for MAG and for the region. Second, again, providing for safety, but in this case, really focusing on the users of the system and not just specifically cars or pedestrians, but looking at all of the users of the system and providing for their safety. Next, enhanced mobility, especially looking at ADA compliant features. And then finally, and a critical piece, once you build it, you have to ensure that you protect those investments you've made as a region. So one of the key components is maintaining that infrastructure throughout the life. So objective and eligibility, this is the objective for the program, really kind of reflects those goals. There's a lot of tie-in between them. It's really enhancing regional mobility by improving the roadways and the infrastructure associated with them. And to do that, we have to know what projects we can build. It's embedded into the name of the program. This is the Arterial Rehabilitation and Reconstruction Program. The focus is on the arterial roadway network, specifically the mile grid network, but also those facilities that connect freeways and other connections, and also other key arterial corridors. So some highlights of the program, kind of go over some of the benchmarks similar to Ms. Kassler's presentation. These were the things we agreed made sense to do. First, eligible phases, little bit of a pivot from prior calls for projects. Those were more focused on the construction phase, just looking at getting the infrastructure built. Here, understanding this is more of a holistic approach, we are now saying everything is eligible. So all the way from pre-design to scoping, all the way through physical construction. Similar to the arterial life cycle that you just heard, the matching component, 70% federal, and then 30% local funds. And then this was an item that had come up previously. This was actually a conversation with our policy committees in November. We had originally started with a concept of having a cap. The thought being we can get more projects constructed. We did get feedback that in these economic conditions that might not be as prudent. So we've pivoted a little bit, and this first call for projects will not be capped. We'll kind of see how the projects come in. One thing to note, once we're done with this call for projects and we get the projects awarded, we will be reconvening the working group to talk about sort of a debrief of the process, what worked, what didn't. So other factors to think about with this, these are federally funded projects. Federal requirements apply. That includes NEPA, Davis-Bacon, application of the Uniform Act for right-of-way. So these will be federally funded. All those requirements apply. One thing that we've kind of been hit or miss, ADOT's project development fee that they assess to oversee development and implementation of the project, that's an eligible cost. So if agencies want to submit that for to be part of the project, they can do that. This is the one I really want to emphasize to the committee. If you're just going to put in for a construction phase, you have to have right-of-way solved or a plan to solve. In all of the other calls for projects we've done, one of the single biggest drivers of project deferrals is issues with right-of-way. So we really want to emphasize the criticality of having a good plan to get the right-of-way in place. And then finally, with all federal funding, enhancements and betterments are not eligible for regional funding. Moving on to the evaluation criteria. So there's both a quantitative and a qualitative component. For the quantitative side, we start with a 60% factor, really looking at three considerations. One, the condition of the pavement, traffic volumes, and then safety. You can see the weighting that makes up the 60%. On the qualitative side, 4 factors. This was an important one that came out of the working groups, giving member agencies the chance to tell the story about the project. So highlighting unique attributes that may not come across in the data. We have a space for that. Funding our points allowed for safety improvements, alignment with the program goals, and then finally, what measure of community engagement has the member agency done for the project? This is really just a pivot of that previous spreadsheet. What it is, it just shows the scoring, how the scoring actually gets calculated. We have maximum points, you apply the score, there's a weighting, you get a total. It is, as I noted, 60% quantitative, 40% qualitative. So next steps, where do we go from here? Month of March, we will have this in front of the policy committees for consideration and potential approval. If that is successful, starting in April, we will go out for the call for projects. We're envisioning 6 weeks for the call for projects. We'll work through that, figure out the timing. One thing we will do is we'll be holding hybrid workshops so people can come ask questions. Also, if a member agency has a specific need and they want MAG staff to come out, talk about their applications, talk about their projects, talk about the scoring network, we can do that with them as well, and we'll certainly be available. And then roughly targeting June for action to approve that first call for projects. And with that, Chair Wilcox and members of TRC, that concludes my presentation. Be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Do any members of the committee have any questions or comments of Patrick?
Mr. Chair, this is Jason Hafner with the town of Gilbert.
Yes, Jason.
Hey, Patrick. I know we didn't really talk about this in the working groups for this, but we're suddenly coming across a utility relocation possible to delay. I know it's probably too late to make any changes to the policy, but just something probably MAG should be aware of when we move forward with this, and maybe other member agencies. But SRP is telling us they're expecting a minimum 18-month delay on some of the Buy America components moving forward. So we're kind of trying to work our way through that right now with SRP and ADOT on a couple of federal projects. But specifically because you mentioned right-of-way becoming sort of the issue that's driving project schedule delays, we may start to see that with utility relocation as well.
Thank you, Chair Wilcox, members of TRC, Mr. Hafner. A point well made. The policies do account for utility relocations, eligible expense. I think as we look at project applications, and if there is a lot of consideration, we will intend to be somewhat flexible in the call itself to make sure we allow sufficient time for projects to be developed and ultimately constructed. But thank you.
Does any of other of our members have any questions or comments of Patrick? Yes, Trevor.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. Patrick, just out of curiosity, can you give some more specifics on the sources of federal funding, what flavor they are?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Chair Wilcox, members of TRC, Mr. Collins. So the question to the source of fund, statutorily, there's a portion of the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program that's allocated to the MAG region. So that is what is being funded. And actually, if you think about it, it makes sense. It's the corollary to Ms. Kassler's presentation, where the Arterial Lifecycle Program no longer has federal funds. They've now shifted over, and they're really the backbone of funding the two arterial competitive programs.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other members have any questions or comments? Hearing none, prior to voting, there is an opportunity for members of the public to comment. I have received no requests for this agenda item. Staff, have we received any online written comments for this agenda item?
Thank you, Chair. We have not received any online written comments for this item.
Thank you. Is there a motion to recommend approval of the Arterial Rehabilitation and Reconstruction Program policies and procedures?
Mr. Chair, Mohammed Yusuf, Town of Queen Creek, so move.
Thank you, Mohammed. Do I have a second?
Second, Anderson, Youngtown.
Thanks, Mr. Anderson. We will have those participating in the meeting online take part in the voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote. Can I have a voice vote for those in the room and those online? Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. Members, please leave your cameras on. Staff, can you take a roll call vote of the members participating virtually who did not turn on their cameras?
Thank you, Chair. Sam Taylor, how do you vote?
Wow. Aye, sorry about that.
He said aye. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion passes.
Thank you. Proceeding to item number 8, Arterial Widening Program Policies and Procedures. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented again by Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Chair Wilcox, members of TRC. Pleasure to present this item as well. I'll note a lot of this slide deck is actually very similar to the Arterial Rehabilitation and Reconstruction Program. As it makes sense, they were developed in concert with each other. So some of the slides I'll go a little quicker through is really focus where we have the deviation between the two programs. Here we go. So again, it's one of the first two competitive programs coming out under the RSTIP. Again, it's federally funded, as we noted previously. And we can't say enough. This really was a team effort. I'm very thankful of the working group staff. We had some fits and starts, went around a couple of items, and it was good though. We had a healthy dialogue to get to a consensus on this program moving forward. Funding for the widening program, a little different, smaller, 15 million a year, 300 million for the life of the arterial widening program. Call for projects, again, no different. The call for projects, and I should note here, they will go out concurrently, but they will be two different calls, two different applications, two different requirements. We're still working internally just to make sure that we are clear about the two programs so that we don't inadvertently get cross-ups on applications. And then finally, again, the technical review starting at the Mag Street Committee. Excuse me. For this program, actually 6 goals. So we have additional goals related to the widening program. First, the name implies it, expanding capacity on existing arterial roadways and intersections. Also, an allowance for establishing new arterial roadways. Promoting connectivity. I think this is a critical component of this, really driving that demand, increasing and enhancing economic vitality. Similar to the rehab program, providing for the safety of all road users. Support the economic competitiveness and really looking at that growth through being very strategic in our investments. And then finally, it makes sense. We always end on protecting that which we have funded. So a real acknowledgement that there's a component to maintain our existing infrastructure. So the objective for this program, really a little different than the rehab, but it's increasing regional mobility. So by improving capacity on roadways, expanding roadways, we're really looking at improving regional mobility while also focusing on that core tenet of safety. And then for the eligibility, no different than the arterial rehab program, just the arterial roadways in the mile grid network, those that provide that connectivity, and of course, other key arterial corridors. Program highlights, all phases are still eligible. Right-of-way utility, thinking to Mr. Hafner's question previously. The match, 70-30, no different here. And again, we had a conversation about funding limits. Want to see how this first call for projects goes. We'll adapt and pivot accordingly, depending on how that turns out. Again, federally funded, ADOT fee is eligible. And one thing, moving back up, because federal requirements apply, obviously, there's going to be that coordination with ADOT, so make sure you allow sufficient time in your project application and schedules to account for that coordination. Again, highlight on right-of-way, enhancements are not eligible. Here's where we see a bit of a difference. So for both the quantitative and qualitative, we have 5 factors each. On the quantitative side, again, roadway volume, move a little bit. What we talk about roadway reliability. So we see travel time index, level of travel time reliability, and then really that emphasis on safety. So there's a twofold approach to safety, not just a serious fatal crash rate, but also looking at non-motorized user crash rates. Then on the qualitative side, thinking back to the goals and really that economic competitiveness and vitality, we have a pivot in there. So one part, meet the goals of the program, makes sense. Allow agencies to tell their story through unique attributes. Again, we talk about safety and we have the community outreach, but then you have that 5th factor and that a fairly substantial weighting for economic development. How does your project drive that? As shown previously, this is just a pivot of the table that again shows the scoring matrix and how it will come to pass once we do score and rank the projects. Next steps will follow the same timeline. This will go along with the other program, March for policy consideration, call for projects later this spring, and targeting currently June Regional Council for approval of the projects. And with that, Chair Wilcox and members of the TRC, that concludes this brief presentation on the widening program. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Do any members have any questions or comments of this presentation? Hearing none, prior to voting, there is an opportunity for members of the public to comment. I have received no requests for this agenda item. Staff, have we received any online written comments for this agenda item?
Thank you, Chair. We have not received any online written comments for this agenda item.
Thank you. Is there a motion to recommend approval of the arterial widening program policies and procedures? Can I have a motion, please?
Chair, I'll move to approve.
Thank you, Parab. We have a motion from Parab.
City of Mesa, Eric Darian, second.
Thank you, Eric. We will have those participating in the meeting online take part in the voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote. Can I have a voice vote of those in the room and those online? Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. Members, please leave your cameras on. Staff, can you take a roll call of the members participating virtually who did not turn on their camera?
Thank you, Chair. Once again, everyone had their cameras on. The motion passes.
Very good. Well done. Moving on to item number 9, development of the Proposition 479 Freeway Life Cycle Program. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented by Arminta Syed, Transportation Policy and Initiatives Program Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of Transportation Review Committee. I'm here today following a similar pattern to the presentations ahead of me to provide an update on another Prop 479, the development of the Prop 479 Freeway Lifecycle Program. This item is for information only today. So before I get into it, quick context. The program was originally put together as part of plan development efforts when the Regional Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Investment Plan, or RSTIP for short, was put together and then ultimately approved by the MAG Regional Council in June 2021. That served as the basis for the extension of the half-cent sales tax, which ultimately guides transportation investments for the next 20 years through 2045, also known as Prop 479. In that plan, there were about 79 freeway projects included, shown here on the slide in front of you. It also included some region-wide programmatic elements, including the continuation of litter, landscape, and sweeping, as well as new programmatic elements such as capital pavement work. Now that the Prop 479 ballot measure has successfully been passed by the voters, we now take the high-level plan and focus our efforts into taking that to a specific program implementation, really turning that into a financial plan to implement the projects as well as those region-wide programmatic elements. And so when it turns to that, we really think about 3 primary considerations. Firstly, we have to consider and are statutorily required to make sure we're developing a fiscally balanced program. What we mean by that is considering the balance at the end of the 20-year program, as well as the balance year over year. In addition, we're also needing to put together a near-term project sequencing. This means when we originally put together the program or the plan, what we did was we put the projects in phases. Those phases consisted of 5-year durations. Those projects, while were put in the phases, they didn't necessarily have specific years associated with them. And so now we have to put the specific construction years associated to those projects. And then finally, looking out beyond the near term, we also have to look at the other projects and phasing and look at the changes that have occurred since we put the plan together, and then consider what other modifications need to be made to those projects. So I'll touch on further details for each of those considerations individually. So first, the development of a fiscally balanced program. So as previously mentioned, the RSTIP contains 79 funded freeway and highway projects. When they were originally put together, they were put together using estimates generated by ADOT in constant dollars. Again, there were not specific construction years associated with those projects. And so as a result, the decision was made to use constant dollars. To align with that, the revenues used were also put in 2020 constant dollars. And then finally, the assumption was made looking at historical trends that the increases in construction costs would be equal to or less than revenue growth. Unfortunately, since that has occurred, that's not necessarily been the experience over the past few years. In fact, construction costs have very much gone up much further than we had originally expected, about 61.5% to be exact. However, on the flip side, revenue estimates have also gone up, and this follows a similar presentation that was made by Mr. Stone the prior month. So what this is showing here is all of the revenue estimates that go into the RSTIP. The three highlighted here are the revenue sources that flow into the freeway program. They consist of the sales tax, they consist of the Highway User Revenue Fund, and they also consist of federal highway funding that flow through ADOT. When you compare the updated 2024 revenue estimates in constant dollars to the original revenue estimates, you see that the revenues that flow into the freeway program are about $4.2 billion higher. Not quite to the same scale that the construction costs increase, but still an increase nonetheless. However, overall, we still expect there to be a program deficit. The good news is that we were very conservative when we originally put the program together, and that helped offset some of that or helped mitigate some of that risk when it came to those cost increases. And so we do expect that deficit to still be smaller than it could have been when you look at the cost increases overall, somewhere between $2 to $3 billion at the end of the program. However, one of the things that Mr. Stone had mentioned in his presentation last month is that the revenue forecasts, excuse me, the revenue forecasts, the increases in the revenue forecasts in the near term were a lot higher than they were looking out into the longer term. And so the program is expected to be in balance for the first 10 years through phase 2 through 2035. And so as a result, at this time, we are not recommending a full program rebalance. Instead, we are recommending a much more measured approach when it comes to development of the full program, because that program is in balance for the first 10 years, and particularly when you consider the amount of variability over the longer term. A lot of this can be seen, particularly when you consider the history of the Prop 400 program, as well as when you look at the fluctuations in construction costs over the longer term. And then in addition, when you think about when we put together a lot of the projects in the plan, a lot of the projects that are further out, a lot of that scope still is undefined at this time. And so there's still a lot of variability in what those assumptions are. And so the measured approach that we are recommending to the program at this time are as follows. First, we are recommending that we either reduce or eliminate the debt service expenses. We had been extremely conservative in the assumptions that we had made for these debt service expenses that we had originally included in the program. Secondly, we are also recommending that we assume that construction costs will stabilize over the program at a point in time. While we have seen some extremely high increases over the past few years, we don't expect that these increases will continue at the same rate over the next 20 years. And at some point, they will level out. And then finally, we do assume that there will be some sort of cost containment through either value engineering or project scope development. So for example, when you look at the 79 projects that are included in the program, one of the things you can see is that there are there are several interchange projects along I-10 that are in close proximity to each other. A lot of these projects, if you can potentially look at grouping them together or constructing them together, that could potentially result in cost savings. So that is an example of where you could do some sort of value engineering that could result in a potential strategy to help balance the program. Now, moving on to the secondary consideration, the near-term project sequencing. So the first phase of the program encompasses fiscal years 2026 to 2030. The Prop 479 revenue collections begin on January 1st, 2026, so halfway through fiscal year 2026, so in relatively short order. And so it's necessary to start at minimum assigning a construction year to these phase one projects, especially because we need to initiate development work if development work hasn't been initiated already, so that they can be ready to go to construction. So I'll go through each of these projects individually. The first project being on Loop 303 from Lake Pleasant Parkway to I-17, as well as the Loop 303 at I-17 system interchange upgrade. This is a project that's currently nearing the completion of final design using some state appropriation funds that were appropriated a few years ago. The recommendation is to advance construction for this to fiscal year 2025, and in order to do so, defer some Prop 400 projects that would better align with some Prop 479 projects that are later in the program. So one of those projects being I-10 Sky Harbor West. There are some other projects on I-10 that this would better align construction schedule with. And then I-17 at Indian School Road. There are some other projects as well on I-17 that this project would, the construction schedule for this project would better align with. Another project on Loop 101 at I-10 91st Avenue Connector has been moving through final design as part of a current Prop 400 project at I-10 at 101 DHOV project. The recommendation here is also to advance construction for this to fiscal year 2025 and to actually construct it as part of that Prop 400 project. This would actually result in this project having some cost savings, as mentioned earlier. And then in addition, I'd like to point out that this is one of the projects that actually we've seen the cost estimate go down from the original. The reason being that when originally the project was put into the plan, it we actually did not know, we had a very high level scope for it. And because some final design work for that has been done, we now have a better idea of what that scope will be. And as a result, have a better estimate, cost estimate assigned to it. Another project, I-10 at Jackrabbit Trail, also moving through final design. This has caused significant traffic issues along the I-10 main line. The recommendation here is to program construction in fiscal year 2026. Now looking at the Southeast Valley project on State Route 24 from Loop 202 to Ironwood Drive. This is a project also moving through final design. Recommendation here is to program construction in fiscal year 2026. And then finally, looking at the center segment of State Route 30, there is funding in Prop 400 for right-of-way acquisition of the center segment. Construction of that center segment is in the first phase of the Prop 400 program. The implementation of construction of that center segment is broken up into 5 phases. This is the first of those 5 implementation phases. It's currently under final design. And so the recommendation here is to program construction for that in fiscal year 2027. And then finally, moving on to the third consideration, moving beyond just the first phase projects. So typically, knowing what a dynamic environment this is, we would be updating the freeway program on an annual basis. Since the plan has not been updated since 2021, there's been quite a few changes we have to consider now that we're actually at a point where we're ready to develop the 479 freeway program. So now looking back at the State Route 30 center or State Route 30 corridor, this is now the full corridor. So not just the center segment here in the orange, but also the western part of the corridor in purple, and then the eastern part of the corridor in green. Originally, when we had put together the implementation plan for the center part of the corridor in orange, the idea was to build it from east to west. Since then, conditions have changed and it may make more sense to implement it in a different manner or order. And so the plan here is to collaborate with ADOT, make sure that the implementation plan still makes sense, or update that to a different implementation plan if there is a more efficient way to implement it, and then come back in April and present that as an update. And then in addition, there is scoping and environmental funding for the western segment in the first phase of the plan. And so the idea would be to initiate that work in fiscal year 2027. Now looking at the northwest portion of the valley, there's been a significant amount of growth in this area since 2021. It's caused a lot of traffic pressures in that area. We've initiated a number of studies looking at how to address those traffic conditions in the area. And one of the things we found is that an interchange that's actually closer to the US 60 Loop 303 interchange would be most helpful in alleviating the pressures up there. And so in the plan, we have funding for construction at an interchange at Loop 303 at Litchfield Road in the second phase of the plan. And so the recommendation here is to exchange that with a different interchange that's closer to US 60 at Loop 303. So Loop 303 at 155th Avenue. And so the recommendation is to exchange the construction funding for Litchfield Road with 155th Avenue, and then also advance that funding to phase one if the cash flow permits. And then similarly, looking at advancing the funding that we already have in the plan for Loop 303 at US 60. Another area of significant growth, looking at State Route 347, there is funding in the program for construction of the Maricopa County portion. The recommendation here is to position the project so that construction can be accelerated if funding for the portion that's outside of the Maricopa County piece of the project, if that's available, the Maricopa County piece is also ready to go to construction. As you can see, there's the portion that goes from Riggs Road to City of Maricopa. That is actually not part of the Prop 479 program. That's something that is would be constructed in partnership with the state. And so we want to make sure that if the state is ready to go to construction with that portion, the Maricopa County portion is also ready and in a position to go to construction. And then finally, looking at US 60 Superstition Freeway from Ellsworth Road to Meridian Road. This is a project that we have construction for in phase 3. We would recommend funding development activities in phase 1 and then looking at advancing construction to phase 2 if the cash flow permits. And then lastly, just touching on the programmatic element. This is the new programmatic element I discussed, the pavement rehab sequencing. This is a line item, a total of $600 million available for this for capital pavement rehab work across the network. The sequencing of this funding would follow a study that's nearing completion, which highlights the priority needs of capital pavement rehab work. That's shown here on the map in front of you. It's also included in your agenda material. And then finally, in terms of next steps, the idea here is that in February, as part of this presentation, we would initiate discussions on these concepts, roll out these priorities, gather some feedback based on the feedback received. We would collaborate with ADOT, draft the first full 479 FLCP to bring back to committee in April, and then ultimately request approval of that FLCP later in May or June this year. And so that concludes the presentation today, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Arminta. Do any members have any questions or comments for this agenda item?
Mr. Chairman, this is Jason, City of Chandler. I have a question.
Yes, Jason.
Hey, Arminta, thanks for the presentation. Just had a question on the phase 1 projects. You ran through several of them and others you did not. I'm wondering, those that you did not, probably because they're not ready for construction, but I'm assuming that design would be programmed early on in phase 1 so that construction could still occur in phase 1. Is that assumption correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of TRC, that's correct. So this, what you saw in the presentation today is not an exhaustive list. It's an initial list of a few of the main priorities. That isn't to say that there aren't also other phase 1 projects that wouldn't also be going to construction in phase 1. And so that's probably what you would also see in April, is that entire list of everything in phase 1, everything in phase 2. So there are definitely other projects in phase 1 that not only will be initiating design in phase 1, but will also be going to construction in phase 1.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions for this agenda item from the membership? Thank you. We'll move on to item number 10, update on the I-10 Broadway Curve Improvement Project. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented by Quinn Caspero, Transportation Engineer.
Good morning, Chair, members of TRC. I will be introducing our speaker today, Marcy McMacken, ADOT Outreach Manager and Spokesperson, regarding this presentation on the I-10 Broadway Curve Improvement Project, which improves 11 miles of I-10 between I-17 and Loop 202. It represents the region's first freeway reconstruction project within the urban core and is the largest reconstruction project in state history. It has an approved budget totaling over $800 million and is being delivered under the state of Arizona's public-private partnership law using a design-build-delivery model. Construction began in July 2021 and is anticipated to be complete in spring of 25. This item represents an update to the progress of the project since it was last presented in February 2024. So ADOT and its partner agencies have worked closely together towards the planning and implementation of this significant project. With that, I welcome Marcy.
Thank you, Quinn, and good morning, everyone, Mr. Chair and members of the TRC. Thank you for having me here today to provide an update on the I-10 Broadway Curve Improvement Project. The construction for this project began just over 3 years ago. And as you will see in this presentation today, we are nearing the end of the construction process. As we get closer and closer to the finish line, we do want to take time to thank our project partners and our stakeholders for their patience and collaboration on this project. A project of this size and of this scope on one of the busiest sections of I-10 in the area undoubtedly has impacted many. But again, rest assured, this project is nearing its end date with a completion date of spring of this year, so just within the next couple of months. Am I controlling or are you controlling? Okay. All right. Before I move on to highlighting some recent construction work from the project within the last year, I'd like to quickly go over some of the major components of the project. They include the construction and addition of 2 general purpose lanes and an HOV lane in both directions on I-10 between US 60 and I-17. That's highlighted in blue on the map. And then also construction of the collector distributor or CD roads in yellow on the map. Those roads have been constructed alongside Interstate 10 in both directions, roughly between Baseline Road and 40th Street. And I'll talk a little bit more about these roads later on in the presentation. Also, one of the major components of the project included reconstruction of the I-10 and US 60 and the I-10 and SR 143 interchange, as well as construction of 2 new multi-use bridges over the interstate between Broadway Road and Baseline Road. One is located at Alameda Drive near Tempe Diablo Stadium. The other one is located near Western Canal by, I believe, the Arizona Mills Mall. Also, this project required that the 48th Street and Broadway Road bridges over I-10 be replaced in order to make room for the widening of I-10. And then also another major component was the widening of the Guadalupe Road bridge over the freeway and the widening of the I-10 bridges over the Salt River. And then lastly, down in the teal-colored blue, you'll see the addition of another travel lane in both directions, roughly between US 60 and the Loop 202 or Ray Road about. So a lot of major components for this project. As I mentioned, we are nearing the end of the project. We are currently in phase 4, the final and last phase. During this phase, we'll see crews complete construction work on the I-10 and SR 143 interchange. They'll also complete work at the I-10 and US 60 interchange. And then, of course, a lot of cosmetic work such as lighting, signage, landscaping, and then install the final roadway surface for some of the freeway lanes on I-10 and on the CD roads. Moving on to some construction highlights from the past year, we're going to start at the west end of the project here at the I-10 bridges over the Salt River. These bridges had to be widened in order to make room for the 2 new additional travel lanes in each direction on I-10. What you're looking at is the placement of the concrete bridge girders for that newly widened portion of I-10. This work was conducted just about a year ago. And this is now what those bridges look like. You can see this photo is actually taken a couple of days right before the new lanes, the 2 new lanes in both directions open to motorists. You can see in this area where the original lanes on the bridge are and where the newly added lanes on the outer sides of the bridges are. Moving east over to the I-10 and 32nd Street, in order to make room for the newly widened I-10, we had to reconstruct the on and off ramps at I-10 and 32nd Street. It took about 40 to 65 days for crews to complete work on each on and off ramp. So this work took place last year and took crews about 9-10 months to complete that interchange in order to make room for the widening of I-10. You can see what it looked like at the beginning of last year and what it looked like just this past October. Oops, let me go back. Moving east on to I-10 and 40th Street interchange, same story here. We had to reconfigure the on and off ramps in order to make room for the widening of I-10. You can see what this interchange looked like back at the beginning of the project and what it looks like now. Most notable or most noticeable is the removal of that eastbound I-10 on ramp at 40th Street that you do see in the left photo So that's completely gone. If you've driven through the I-10 and SR 143 interchange, you've probably noticed a lot of work taking place there. That's because crews have constructed new bridges connecting the I-10 and SR 143 interchange. One of the last things that will open to motorists within the next couple of weeks is the new HOV flyover ramps that connect I-10 and SR 143 for traffic that's traveling from westbound I-10 to northbound SR 143 in the HOV lane, and then also in the HOV lane, that flyover ramp for motorists on southbound SR 143 to eastbound I-10. You'll notice that the southbound SR 143 to eastbound I-10 loop ramp is gone. That ramp used to back up, but that is now gone, and we should not have that congestion that we saw there when that loop ramp was there. As I mentioned earlier in the project overview, the 48th Street bridges over the interstate had to be completely replaced in order to make room to add those additional lanes on I-10 mainline. You can see what it looked like back in 2022. Crews were able to construct the new bridges right next to the previous ones. And once the new bridges were completed, crews shifted traffic onto the new bridges and were then able to remove the previous bridge. And on your far right is what that bridge looks like now. Similar story at Broadway Road Bridge. That bridge also had to be replaced in order to make room for the widening of I-10. Crews again constructed the new bridge over the freeway and then removed the previous one, and that's what that bridge looks like now on the far right in that aerial. There's also been a lot of work at the I-10 and US 60 interchange. The eastbound I-10 off-ramp at Baseline Road was completely reconstructed. A lot of the work here at this interchange, though, focused on tying in the westbound US 60 lanes to the new westbound collector distributor and to the I-10 westbound mainline lanes. You've probably noticed the new multi-use bridges over Interstate 10 over between Baseline and Broadway Road, and you've probably noticed the large magenta steel type structures on top of the bridges. These structures are actually artwork. The city of Tempe funded and worked with a local artist to create what they describe as, and they're supposed to represent the prickly pear cactus fruit. So if you're wondering what those were, that's what this is. One of the features of this artwork is that when the sun shines through these metal structures at certain times of the day, it casts decorative shadows onto the bridge deck. So if you were wondering what these are, or if you haven't seen them yet, now you'll know what they are. I mentioned the collector distributor roads earlier on, and these roads were constructed alongside mainline I-10 in both directions between Baseline Road and roughly 40th Street. The purpose of these roads is actually to separate the I-10 mainline traffic from the traffic that's exiting and entering the freeway through the Broadway curve area. In that area, there was a lot of weaving and lane changing, and the collector distributor roads are going to help minimize that lane changing and weaving, making it safer for motorists. The westbound CD roads opened up in August of last year, and then soon after that, the eastbound CD roads opened back in November. Because the CD roads are a new concept for Arizonans, ADOT made sure that we created an educational campaign for the public. It's called Find Your Lane. And this campaign consisted of creating an informational website that housed not only information about what the collector distributor roads were and how to use them, but we also provided animated videos to show motorists just how these collector distributor roads work. We also used advertising in local newspapers to create educational awareness of the CD roads. We used social media. We collaborated with the local media also to educate the public about these new roads. And then we also held a lot of community outreach table events through the region just to reach as many people as we could in preparation for the opening of these CD roads. This campaign actually started last April or May. The public involvement part of this project was immense. It was very important for ADOT to make sure that everyone, businesses, project stakeholders, project partners, stakeholders, and the public were aware of the project and what was going on, not only when it came to restrictions and closures, but also informing everyone about the construction process and explaining why closures were needed and what was being done and how it was being done. We used social media to show behind the scenes construction work so that, you know, the public could learn maybe a thing or two about construction and what goes into it. So what next? As I mentioned earlier, the I-10 and SR 143 interchange will open their new HOV lanes that connect I-10 and SR 143. Also, the additional HOV lanes on I-10 main line in both directions between US 60 and I-17 will open to motorists just here within the next couple of weeks. So a lot is happening in the next couple of weeks. And then, of course, crews will focus on landscaping, lighting, and final pavement and roadway work. We recognize that the project indeed was impactful on many, but we also wanted to share with everyone some of the project benefits we'll see once this project is complete. This project should or will help reduce travel times and congestion through the Broadway Curve area. We'll also see fewer lane changes and weaving with the construction of the CD roads. And then this project will also help support ride sharing and transit with that additional HOV lane. And these are just some of the other benefits we'll see. This photo that you're looking at was taken on the I-10 in the Broadway Curve area back in 1968 when I-10 opened up in this area. Our project team decided to recreate this video as a kind of a project team building event. And we invited project team members, project stakeholders, and project partners, as well as community leaders to come out and recreate this video. And we did it on Super Bowl Sunday, if you believe that. We had 80 people show up, and this is what we got. We had Governor Katie Hobbs attend, Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego, who else? Mayor Corey Woods from Tempe, and also Mayor Jerry Wires from Glendale. And this is what we came up with. So almost 6 decades later, we recreated the same photo. And that concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you. Do any members have any questions or comments for this agenda item?
Just a
Yes.
quick note of congratulations. We're also been building a project over several years, but quite an undertaking. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, quite an accomplishment. We'll move on to item number 11, request for future agenda items. Are there any requests from the membership for an item on a future agenda? Hearing none, the next agenda item is comments from the committee. Are there any comments or announcements from the membership? Hearing none, the next meeting of the Transportation Review Committee will be on Thursday, March 27th at 10:00 a.m. With no further business, today's meeting is adjourned at 11:15 a.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you all.